Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Erin. I am a park interpretive specialist with California State Parks, coming to you from Angel Island State Park in the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area. We are so excited to have you join us this first day of April, the Civil War and the role of California in the American Civil War. So we've got with us interpreters John from Angel Island State Park. Go ahead and wave, John, as Private John today. And we have interpreter 2, Casey Dexter-Lee, and she is also coming to us from Angel Island. Hi, Casey. And from Fort Tejon State Historic Park, we have Michael Deegan in a costume today. So we will be, we're excited to be sharing this program with you. And first, we're going to turn it over to Michael. So Michael, welcome and take it away.
Well, thanks, Erin. Thanks for that intro. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for joining us today for our presentation. We have a lot of fun doing this just as much. If you guys have questions, I hope you'll contact us later. This is an incredibly complex and intricate and emotional subject. And so with the time we have, we're going to try to give you guys at least a little taste of what California's role was with the great struggle that our nation went through, the Great Civil War. And you know, when I speak to students about this and do different presentations, I always make this first disclaimer. We have a lot of fun presenting this and learning this history and helping you guys engage with it as well. But remember that what we're speaking about, and usually I have pictures that I show of, you know, the destructions of Atlanta and Richmond and other American cities and dead on battlefields. This was a real story that involved real people and American cities. And it was American treasury, lives, property, blood, soil, damaged and tarnished, and that got involved with this. So it's a very serious subject, but it's also the reason that we bring it to light to teach it as well. Okay, so as Erin mentioned, I'm coming to you from Fort Tejon State Historic Park. Now, some of you might say, "Oh, well, where's Fort Tejon again?" Just so you know, we're about 76 miles north of Los Angeles. Now, if you're Californian, you probably heard of the Grapevine. If you haven't, the Grapevine is a 40-mile section of the Interstate 5 freeway, what used to be the old stagecoach route, that runs through the mountains north of Los Angeles. It's called the Grapevine because it used to be covered in grapes. When the first Spanish explorers came through here, they call it Cañada de las Uvas, the Canyon of the Grapes, right? So that section is known as the Grapevine, and we're at the northern end of it, just as you're coming down out of the mountains, heading towards the San Joaquin Valley, which is the big valley that runs down the middle of California with all the farming in it and so on, okay? And I'm coming to you today from one of our restored buildings here, which is one of the barracks that stood at Fort Tejon. Now, let me give you a little role of where Fort Tejon falls within the Civil War. Prior to the war, this is established by the United States troops, regular troops, and they're sent here after there's a small development that happened in Northern California where they find this precious metal in a stream in 1848. And word gets out, and people are rushing to California to strike it rich. Not that many did. It turns very quickly. California qualifies to become a state. 1850, September 9th, 1850, California joins the Union. Okay, so once it's officially part of the Union, the 31st state, California, the U.S. government is sending agents to help facilitate the settlement of the state, and so dragoons are sent out here. And placed about 20 miles away from a reservation to help kind of protect the Native Americans that were moving on there from all these wild gold rushers and keep them from reacting with to provocations and so on. It's kind of a peacekeeping mission. It expands into law enforcement and patrols and contributing to life and riot suppression and all sorts of stuff. Okay. So Fort Tejon, at the start of the Civil War, I should say, let me back up a little bit. So California joins the Union, which kind of creates the Compromise of 1850. The big debate goes on in Congress to maintain the power between the northern states and the southern states. And so the Compromise of 1850 California joins as a free state. It's in the Constitution of 1849, the state Constitution, 1849. Okay. Now, prior to the Civil War, here's an interesting fact you might not know. In 1860, the legislature in 1850, in 1860 votes to divide California, both houses vote and approve to divide California into the 6 southern counties into a separate self-governing territory, and the governor actually signs it. They send it to Congress, and Congress was going to consider it, but then the Civil War comes about, and with fears of secession, never act on it. Okay, so now California. Why mention California when we talk about a lot of Civil War? People talk about, when I talk to students and other folks with presentations, say, well, what do you guys know about the Civil War? And oftentimes you'll hear Abraham Lincoln or Gettysburg or muskets and General Grant and stuff like that. Sherman's march to through Georgia. So why are we spending time with this state that is technically beyond the borders of beyond the frontier of California? Remember, Westerners, the Western theater of the Civil War in those days was considered to be Arkansas, Texas, and Missouri, and parts of Tennessee, and so on. So what's California? If those are Westerners, that's the frontier of California. This is half a continent away. It's a lot like Americans might think today of Guam, the far exotic Western Pacific. So why mention California? Well, one thing in particular, it doesn't have the great battles like Gettysburg and Antietam and Bull Run and the Fort Sumter and so on. And the troops that are involved here are compared to the armies that were fighting in the East, minuscule. But what happens here has the ability to greatly affect the war. And for the North in particular, it's important to keep those gold mines from Nevada and California operating. For the South, once the war has arrived, it's important for if they can get parts of California to secede, or all of California, or conquer it, you'll have a seaport free from the blockade that the federal states were setting up around the South during the Civil War. Okay? And I'd like to mention too, prior to the Civil War, there are a lot of officers that were serving out in this new state called California, who would find themselves in major theaters back east of the Civil War. Guys like Joseph Hooker, who would command the Army of the Potomac at Chancellorsville, William T. Sherman, who was known for his march through Georgia, U.S. Grant, Winfield Scott Hancock, and Lewis Armistead. And some of you may have heard the story while they were serving here as regular Army officers, like the rest of these guys. There's a story that I think it's Armistead's wife tells about them meeting in California before they part their ways. And when Armistead goes to the South and Hancock serves the Federal Army. And it was kind of an emotional parting of very good friends that they had become while serving the regular Army in California. There's also Albert Sidney Johnson, considered the best officer in the U.S. Army at the time, who was also from the South. And at the time that the Southern states are seceding after the election of 1860, he actually, even though he's pro-Southern, he fends off an attempt to seize the Benicia Arsenal in parts of California. He fulfills his federal service until the moment his resignation is accepted, a point of honor. He then heads down to LA, Los Angeles, and joins the Los Angeles Mounted Rifles. When the election of 1860 arrives and secession is in the air, people don't realize that there was a lot of pro-Southern sentiment in the state of California. Even the governor at the time was pro-Southern sentiment. But it's interesting, you see these guys at crucial points when they're still in federal service honoring those calls. Albert Sidney Johnson then joins the Mounted Rifles. They get an issue from the governor of rifles, and then they escort him kind of very quietly, make their way towards Texas. There's a whole book written on about the epic travel to get to Texas. He ends up commanding armies, dies at the Battle of Shiloh, but that's another story for another day. All right, so I mentioned there were incredible secessionist sentiments in the state. So Los Angeles in particular, especially in the Southern California, there were a lot of Southerners who were pro-secession, pro-slavery, in favor of the Confederacy and the Southern states. So in particular, Los Angeles. In fact, the LA Mountain Rifles I mentioned was captained by the undersheriff of LA County. And the sheriff of LA County, his boss, became one of the lieutenants of that company as they headed to Texas. San Bernardino, El Monte, even Visalia, kind of Central California, huge secessionist sentiments there, okay? So when the Civil War arrives, though, things kind of changed. There's kind of a patriotic fervor that runs through the state, especially in Northern California. Shortly after the start of the war, I think it was in May, the California legislature adopts a resolution in favor of the Union. Now, in addition, there's a telegram that's sent from California by the Chief Justice of California at the time, Stephen Field, to Lincoln. Let me read you this real quick. There's not his whole telegram. There's a section I want to read you that's kind of telling about this patriotic fervor that runs through the nation. And despite the Confederate sentiment, seems to be the predominant force in California. So in the first part of his telegram, and it's the first telegram, by the way, sent across the nation from California to Lincoln. And he, in the first paragraph, he mentions the commending the creating of the telegraph and so on. But then he says in the second paragraph, they believe, meaning people of California, the telegraph, will be the means of strengthening the attachment by which bind both the East and West to the Union, and the desire in this first message across the continent to express their loyalty to that Union and their determination to stand with the government in this its day of trial. They regard the government with affection and will adhere to it under all fortune. Stephen J. Field, Chief Justice, California, acting in the capacity of the governor who was unavailable at the time. So let's talk a little bit. What did California contribute? There's this incredible patriotic fervor going on. There's a lot of Confederate sentiment. Work's going to begin to keep California Union or turn it over. Well, what does California contribute once the war is part of it and they're sending messages saying to Lincoln, we're with you, right? Well, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, so to speak, is gold. In fact, let me read you another quote. This is from General Grant. This is just a brief one. He said later on, he said, I do not know what we could do in this great national emergency were it not for the gold sent from California. There were literally tens of millions of dollars sent just during the Civil War east to help bankroll the war effort. And what's interesting is the federal government was getting a little desperate and decided to start issuing greenbacks, fiat currency, to help fund the war effort. And California is the one state in the Union who said, we're really not gonna work with that as legal tender, collecto, accept that for taxes, et cetera, et cetera. For 17 years, they defied the federal government and said, no, most money here, most payments and taxes will be received in specie, gold and silver. And they did that for 17 years until the United States went back on the gold standard, which is interesting. So in terms of troops, 15,725 volunteers were offered by the Union during the Civil War. Early on, that Confederate sentiment that was kind of spilling up and welling up and showing potential was quelled initially by the volunteers. Troops, dragoons, right here at Fort Tejon, had to establish Camp Latham down in LA to remind them that it's not a good idea to try any secessionist movements in the state. And so regulars were being sent around the state, but they were needed back east. So when California volunteers start showing up, they start raising troops. California eventually contributes 2 regiments of cavalry, 8 regiments of infantry, a battalion of veteran infantry, a battalion of a new unit called Mountaineers, right? Which the Army retains today, the 10th Mountain Division, and 8 companies of infantry for service in the Washington Territory because they weren't able to raise enough troops themselves. So these troops that are raised mostly around the gold fields in California, Sacramento, San Francisco, are being sent to keep basically the West, what becomes the West Coast of the United States, on the side of the Union. They find themselves in Washington, all over California, parts of Nevada. I'll get into later that they also find themselves in Arizona, New Mexico, or what would become Arizona and Mexico's territory at the time. And California, these guys end up occupying more than 1 million square miles. So the other half of the continent where the big Eastern battles aren't going on. Imagine if that had fallen to the Confederacy, free seaports, the gold, all that territory. It's incredible. California also expended $3 million for war operations. And I was reading something recently where well into the 1950s, they were still seeking reimbursement for that. All right. So now and they didn't just contribute troops working on the West Coast. In 1861, Oregon Senator Edward Baker recruits the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th California Infantry in Philadelphia. They're Philadelphians, but they want the name of, he wants to use the name of California. When he's killed at Ball's Bluff, they go back, they become the 69th, 71st, 72nd, and 106th Pennsylvania. And some of those regiment names might ring your ears a little bit. The 69th, 71st, and 72nd were at the critical moment, what some people call the high tide of the Civil War. They fought at the angle right at the end of Pickett's charge, and where Pickett's charge was eventually turned away and ended, creating a loss for the Confederacy at Gettysburg. All right, so I should also mention the Cal 100. I think you probably saw that banner behind Erin. That's the guidon that hangs in our state capitol today of the Cal 100. There were a company men, 100 men, the Cal 100, that joined the 2nd Mass Volunteer. They were recruited from California, paid their way to go fight east. A lot of these troops that found their duty on the West Coast, not so exciting. A lot of them were pleading to go east. These guys actually paid their way to go east and joined the 2nd Mass Cavalry. And then 4 more companies eventually followed them, creating the Cal Battalion. And those guys fought through some of the big Eastern battles through most of the war. In fact, some of them were even at Appomattox at the surrender of General Lee. Okay, so let me give you an example of some of the operations that these troops were involved with on the West Coast, and especially in California. Early in the war, I mentioned that the regulars were used to kind of quell the Confederate sentiment. Dragoons left Fort Tejon here, for example, go to LA, create Camp Latham. They were also involved, so in quelling these secessionist sentiments, let me just give you one example. There were a number of people pro-Southern who left Southern California and other parts of California to head towards Texas and eventually join the Confederacy. The closest number I've seen so far has been about 250. So one example would be what was known as the Showalter affair. Daniel Showalter was an assemblyman in Sacramento for California, and he was involved with a duel earlier that year with another assemblyman, killed the guy. He won the duel, but he was very pro-Southern, and he took about 20 men. He intended to bring more, but he took 20 men and they started heading across the Southern California desert towards Fort Yuma, and then they were going to cross over into Texas. Well, word got out that what they were up to. At first, a number of groups like Albert Sidney Johnson's group and the LA Mountain Rifles pretty much went there unharassed. These guys, they found out about it, and these guys were intercepted by the 1st California Cavalry, and they were questioned. They found letters on them about where they were headed and sending them back to Los Angeles, encouraging people to come with them and where they were going. They protested and said, oh, no, we're just miners. We're going to Sonora, Mexico. But eventually they were imprisoned for a while at Fort Yuma. They made them take the oath of allegiance. They said, okay, I'll take the oath of allegiance. And then Showalter and his group eventually made their way to Texas, and he became a lieutenant colonel professor anyways. But they were trying to kind of quell that Confederate sentiment from supporting Confederacy in Texas and other theaters and in California. April through August of 1862. So we want to know the one time, well, not the one time, but one of the major military operations you find on the West Coast. April to August 1862, known as the Cow Column March. Confederates under General Sibley are heading from Texas, and they're finding success in the New Mexico territory heading towards California. Colonel Carleton, later Brigadier General Carleton, who was a regular captain here at Fort Tejon of Dragoons. He knew the West, he knew that desert, and he was a very professional officer, puts together a column of 1,500 men, and eventually it grows to 2,300, to meet the Confederates, and they eventually meet at the Battle of Picacho Pass, okay? Now, the casualties total were probably just a little less than a dozen. Nothing, not even a skirmish in the Eastern Theater. But look at what it's affecting. Southern California, the New Mexico territory, and Arizona, Western Texas. They defeat them, push them back, march all the way to El Paso, Texas, raise the flag, and Confederates never come back after that. They were kind of aided by rumors that they were cannibals. So by the time they got there, there was already fear instilled in their enemies' hearts, right? Let me read you, and here's a quote from General Carleton about the quality of these California troops, okay? Now he's giving credit to his men. He's saying, traversing a desert country that has heretofore been regarded as impracticable for the operations of large bodies of troops, they've reached their destination and accomplished the object assigned them, not only without loss of any kind, but improved in discipline, morale, and every other element of efficiency. California has reason to be proud of the sons she has sent across the continent to assist in the great struggle in which our country is now engaged. All right, so that's an example of actual military operations by very efficient officers and highly fit and trained troops. On the naval side, March 15th, 1863, the Navy, the Revenue Service at the time, and the San Francisco Police seized the J.M. Chapman, which was a Confederate schooner that was going to take sail that evening and work on raiding operations along the California coast in the Pacific. The U.S. was sending a lot of that gold, $1 million to $1.5 million a time in ships down that coast to ship, and so they were going to take advantage of it. They were intercepted. This Confederate sentiment was found out and seized. In 1864, Captain Ingram's partisan Rangers were raiding, more like criminals. I don't know if you call them Rangers, but they were raiding around Northern California and Central California, seeking to seize money to send to support the Confederacy. By 1864, things are not as bright for the Confederacy. In June 30th, for example, 1864, they committed what was known as the Bullion Bend robbery, $40,000 in 1864 dollars, near Placerville, northeast of Sacramento, I believe. Eventually, they're caught by the Santa Clara County Sheriff. But examples of stagecoach robbings, partisan operations in California that were also eventually detected and shut down. Okay. Last thing which brings us back to Fort Tejon, I should mention, a lot of the California troops through Northern California, along the routes through Arizona and New Mexico, all through California were battles with different Indian tribes. So during the Civil War in particular, General Patrick Connor finds himself in Utah, reminding, because the Mormons' loyalties were not trusted, so he was there to kind of make a presence. But while he's there, he's involved with operations against the Shoshone. He's involved in the battle, or really more like the massacre of Bear River, the Goshoot War, 2 Years' War, the Snake War, and in particular, what involves Fort Tejon is the Owens Valley War. So each of these has its own unique groups involved, and they have circumstances that are unique to them, but generally they kind of follow this trend that I'll mention in the Owens Valley. So you have in the Owens Valley, for example, Paiute tribes who have been living there for thousands of years, and these new settlers, from starting with the gold rush and moving on, are moving in and affecting their ability to live and actually even feed themselves. They react by stealing or kind of reacting to provocations. And it kind of goes back and forth where there's miners and settlers killed and harmed, and then they react, kind of overreact and kill bands of Paiutes and other Native American tribes as well. Then they petition the government for help and so on. And so the long story short, what happened there that brings us to Fort Tejon was that Captain McLaughlin of the Company D of the 2nd California Cavalry decides to show them, to end this once and for all. Now, this had been going on since 1862. So in 1863, he heads down there and they basically surround the tribe. They surprise him, they surround him. And then I can't believe he writes this in his reports. I guess today it would be almost a mission of a war crime, perhaps. part of his report says, you know, it was unfortunate. We separated the 35. We separated the men and the women and children out, and then they invited what they didn't know at the time was a rival chief who they thought was peaceful to them, who's picking out his political rivals, and they vouched for some of the men, or the bucks, as Captain McLaughlin referred to them. They had 35 left, and so with no vouching for them, he said it was unfortunate, but they had to be sabered or shot to death, right? And so once that is over, a number of the chiefs in the area come to make peace. Captain McLaughlin, long story short, finds himself with about 1,000 pipes and marches them through the Walker Pass and towards Fort Tejon. The Sebastian Indian Reservation that the Dragoons originally had arrived here for a decade before was still in operation. But the Indian agents do not want to take responsibility for them. They say, no, we're taking care of the Tejon Indians. We don't want to take responsibility for them. The Army splits up this group, send them to 3 different locations. They're still responsible for 300. So they become wards or in custody of the Army. So when they arrive at Fort Tejon and the troops they reactivate Fort Tejon, and they keep these pirates here for about a year. And at one point, they feel very bad for them. Eventually, the cavalry is replaced by infantry who are settled down here and watch over them until they find out what's going to happen with them. And after a while, they start to feel bad for them, but they're not allowed to use rations and other supplies for these folks. So eventually, Company B and G, the captains, agree to give them rations based on calling them prisoners of war, which is allowed under the Army protocol, just to at least keep them from starving to death. So while they're here, the troops are garrisoned, and they're pretty much uniformed as I was. It seems that, as far as we can tell from records, California troops, despite being out far west, far from the Eastern theaters and the formality of the Eastern armies, were given the standard Army uniform and kept well supplied. So looking a lot like I am, troops were probably in this very same room, re-garrisoning it, and keeping an eye on these pirate wards that they're trying to figure out what to do and keep from starving. And eventually, they are sent to the Tule River Reservation, which is actually still a reservation today, and then they head to Los Angeles. So, and while they're here, the troops are worked very hard by their officers. There is actually Visalia with some of that pro-Southern sentiment. There's a paper that publishes their discontent here, where the officer, besides having to simply watch over the Native Americans, are having them do a lot of menial labor to keep the fort repaired and built up. At one point, they're sent out to help local ranchers build fences. They're using Army troops to help with this. But eventually, this mission is done. Fort Tejon, because it's so expensive to supply here in the Grapevine, is declared finally and fully non-operational. It's given back to local ranchers. The troops leave from here and head to Los Angeles. The last of the California troops are eventually mustered out in the service of their state and their country in 1867. Let me just end with this this quote from Abraham Lincoln. Now, this is written not long before his assassination, and he's speaking to a friend, Charles Maltby, which is one of the superintendent of Indian Affairs for California at the time. And he said, "I've long desired to see California. The production of her gold mines has been a marvel to me, and her stand for the Union, her generous offerings to the Sanitary Commission, and her loyal representatives have endeared your people to me. And nothing would give me more pleasure than a visit to the Pacific shore, and to say in person to your citizens, God bless you for your devotion to the Union. But the unknown is before us. I may say, however, that I have it now in purpose, when the railroad is finished, to visit your wonderful state." Abraham Lincoln, March 25th, 1865. So guys, I hope, again, if this is a huge, complex subject, I hope that kind of at least sets the stage for a little more understanding and maybe a little more investigation on your part as well. If you want to discuss these further or have more questions, you can always contact Fort Tejon. Those messages will come to me. But thanks for joining us on this day here at Fort Tejon. Erin, back to you.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was awesome to hear all of your information that you shared with us. I would like to thank you again. And we're going to turn it over to Casey at Angel Island State Park. So Casey, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Erin. So we're live from Angel Island State Park today, and I'm at Camp Reynolds, which is on the west side of Angel Island. Angel Island is in the middle of San Francisco Bay, and Erin's going to share a map so you can kind of get a better idea of where we're situated. So this was a Civil War fort, and we were established in 1863, so a couple years after the beginning of the war. And when Angel Island was first selected as a location for defensive cannons to be placed, it wasn't actually the first spot they wanted to build this. And you can see in this map, Angel Island's at the top of the screen at, I believe it's number 3. And the original location where they wanted to put cannons was across from Fort Point, which is number 1 on the map. And that's at the mouth of the Golden Gate. Now, the Golden Gate is that narrow space that leads into San Francisco Bay. And today, the Golden Gate Bridge goes across that area. But it was always called the Golden Gate, even before the bridge was built there. And so Fort Point is down at the south end. They wanted to build on the north end, but the Army couldn't get the land from the landowner. They had Fort Alcatraz at number 2 on the map, and Angel Island became the backup location at number 3. The idea was that we knew there were Confederate raiders out in the Pacific, and Confederate raiders are basically hired pirates. If you think of the football team, the Raiders, and their mascot, it's a pirate. And the raiders are hired by the Confederacy, but not paid by the Confederacy. So they are paid in whatever they can get from the ships they attack. The most well-known ship to come into the Pacific during this time of the Civil War was the CSS Shenandoah. And during the course of the war, they sank about 40 ships. Now, these are mostly whaling ships they're attacking, because whaling ships were full of whale oil, which was almost as good as gold. And that whale oil was part of the economy of the North. So every ship that was attacked was a blow to the North, and that oil could basically be turned into money as payment for the work that the Confederates were doing in the Pacific. Now, there were concerns, in addition to that attempted raid on Alcatraz by the Chapman, there was concern that some of those raiders in the Pacific might try to come right into San Francisco Bay. So building up these defenses was critical to protect the bay. Now, as we were hearing, the gold that's in California was very essential to paying for the Northern War effort. But that gold ultimately leaves through San Francisco Bay. Now, between 3 and 4 on the map, we see Raccoon Straits. Now, Raccoon Straits is the key to why Angel Island was chosen as a location for cannons, because if those ships, especially in a heavy fog, you can imagine here in the bay, hugged the north side of the Golden Gate, they would be kind of on the outer range of Fort Point at the south end of the gate. And they might be able to hug that Sausalito coastline and go north through Raccoon Straits and avoid Alcatraz's guns altogether. And so building up on Angel Island protected that route from potential invasion. Erin, can we see the next picture? Because this is going to show you some of the cannons they had on Alcatraz. Huge cannons, bigger than a grown adult male. So you can see that cannon is actually pointed right at Angel Island. And we actually have in our collections some of the cannonballs that were fired at Angel Island during practice. Now, we know that they practiced quite a bit because we have quite a few cannonballs in our collection from Alcatraz. And we know they're from Alcatraz because some of them were originally found on the shores on the south side of the island that have been recovered and put into collections, but also the size of the cannonball. The cannons on Angel Island were much smaller than this. And these are some folks picnicking by those Civil War cannons about 10 to 15 years later when they'd been abandoned. And our cannons were much smaller. And you can see the scale there with the hand on the cannonball than what was coming from Alcatraz. And we know that there were some memos sent back and forth between the commanding officers at Camp Reynolds and at Alcatraz, requesting that Alcatraz stop using Angel Island as target practice because there were children on the island, and they were walking back and forth from different parts of the island to go to school. So in the next photo, we'll see the quote from one of our most famous visitors to Angel Island, when just less than a year after Camp Reynolds was established in 1863, we had a visit from a reporter from the Daily Morning Call. Now, Samuel Clemens is the name of the reporter. Some of you might know him better as Mark Twain. Now, he described Angel Island as a little valley lying between the entrance of Raccoon Straits and the battery destined to guard the fort here. It bears the appearance of a pleasant little village with white houses and fixings, indicative of officers' families, soldiers' barracks, and domestic life. And that's what's behind me right here. So this little valley was filled with just a smattering of buildings when he came in 1864. Now this camp was built up quite a bit in later years, and
We'll see what's happening here with our Angel Island. I'm not sure where they went. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Hopefully they'll come back and join us. What you're looking here at right now is Camp Reynolds during the Civil War era. Let's see, while we're waiting for that, Michael, are you still there? I'm wondering if you could jump in here.
Indeed, I'm here.
Michael, would you like to share just a little bit more about your uniform, and then hopefully we'll get Angel Island back?
Absolutely. Be careful. Get me talking. So this is the standard federal uniform. The guys that were in this very room, this very barracks at Fort Tejon, were issued this uniform. So you have the model 1858 uniform hat, more popularly known as the Hardy hat, way more practical than one of these dragoon shakos. And then you have the infantry frock coat trimmed in blue, the infantry branch indication. You'll see my equipment, which is all mostly made out of leather, the equipment belt, cap box. The ammunition is actually two parts: gunpowder and bullets in the cartridge box and my cap box. You can see it's also a long-skirted uniform called a frock coat, right? And then you can also see I'm wearing my bayonet scabbard. Oh, are we ready to go?
I think we got Angel Island back. Thank you for taking that, Michael. All right, so we're gonna go back to Angel Island.
That was a great description of the uniforms. Thank you so much, Michael. We had a little technical difficulty. So Erin, the next photo we were going to show is what Mark Twain would have seen when he was here, which is the pleasant little village he described as Camp Reynolds. Now, Camp Reynolds was fairly small at the time. One of the first buildings built was the bakehouse at #1 in the photo. That's all the way up here at the top of the hill. And the bakehouse was essential because an army marches on its stomach, or at least that's what they would say. So meaning you need to have full bellies for your soldiers to be able to accomplish anything. So the bakehouse is one of the first structures built here on Angel Island in 1863. We also have the commanding officers home, which is #2. Now, a lot of people, when they visit the park today, assume that the nice houses at the top of the hill are where the commanding officer lived. But what they forget is that this was a water-based fort. This was all about moving back and forth to the island from the pier. And so the commanding officer would not want to walk up and down this big giant hill every time he needed to interact with incoming ships and shipments and outgoing shipments. So that was actually closest down to the water right here. So the non-officers would have lived in barracks, which is #3, and those barracks are all gone today. There were additional buildings built up during the Indian Wars period here on Angel Island. So similar story, those soldiers are as Fort Tejon, where you have soldiers being sent out to, subdue the native peoples of California and beyond. And then what's very hard to see in this picture because of the fog that's in at the time, that same fog that might hide a Confederate ship, and the whole reason Camp Reynolds was built, is #4, the Golden Gate. Now, the Golden Gate isn't very visible in this image, but that's the point. in a heavy fog, that ship might just appear almost out of nowhere. And so it was critical to have these different locations covered. Now, the last photo here is an interior photo of the bakehouse today. And we've rebuilt one of the 2 ovens that were in the building so that we can do living history baking with students and sometimes the public here in the park. So we hope that we'll be able to return to that someday in the near future, but it'll probably be a little while before we're baking with the public, but you can still see these how the building was used and kind of brings that building back to life. All right, so we're going to turn things over to John in just a moment here. And John is going to be doing a cannon firing demonstration. Now, the cannon he's using was not those big giant cannons that we saw in those historic photos. This is a much smaller version, but it was on Angel Island and mostly would have been used for training, for when it would have been used in the battlefield, or for fun, celebratory reasons. Maybe it's the last day the regiment is going to be on post. So we're going to do kind of a celebratory version of a cannon demonstration. And I'm going to turn folks over to John, and I will probably get a little better camera angle here so you can see how well he protects the Golden Gate while he fires this cannon.
I'm dressed as a private in the United States Army at the time. And right here is the 12-pound mountain howitzer. And this cannon weighs much more than 12 pounds, but the name 12-pound mountain howitzer refers to the projectile that this cannon fires. And basically the cannonball is 12 pounds. And right here we have where the gunpowder would be in the linen sack. And this cannon is actually a hollow cannonball, and they call it spherical case. And what you have here is a hollow inside where you would fill it with gunpowder. And this hollow cannonball would have a fuse, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And we think about 3-second fuse would be the largest distance that this cannonball would travel. About 900 meters would be the distance that this could reach out. And then when the cannon originally gets fired, some of that fire from the gunpowder would reach around in the front and light that secondary fuse, and then 3 seconds later, boom, exploding the spherical case. There's other things that this cannon can fire. One of them is canister, and in it you have about 200 musket balls, basically turning that cannon into a giant shotgun. You can also fire a solid cannonball, but basically the projectiles that this cannon fires is 12 pounds. The other neat thing about this cannon is it's small enough that we can fire it here and we can get this in and out to be able to use for our purposes. But the mountain part is that you can take this apart and you can put it on the backs of mules, and wherever a mule can walk up in the mountains, you can take this cannon with you. Another mule would carry the carriage and the wheels, and a third mule would be carrying the gunpowder and the projectiles of this cannon. It's small enough today that I can fire it, just me today. Normally, we would have 6 men that would be firing this cannon, and if trained men could do this, they could fire it pretty rapidly. Today, we're going to fire it once. It's going to be me filling in all the holes, and I'm going to do a little bit of a up close of what we're going to do, and then I'm going to load this thing for real. So one of the tools that we use is the worm, and we're going to be worming the bore, and then the other end is this giant Q-tip looking thing, and we have a wet sponge and a dry sponge, and we also have a rammer. So here's some of the tools that we're going to be using to fire it. And basically, we're going to be firing it in a moment, but we're going to load it from the muzzle, and we're going to put that gunpowder all the way into the back. And today we have that wrapped up in foil, but we're not going to be using any projectiles. And that's what we're going to do. I'm gonna get a few things ready right now.
All right, Erin, could you show us those cutaways of those shells that would have been used? And you can see the different styles of projectile. So that's that full crew that John was talking about. We don't have that many people on the island today, so we don't have a full crew. And this is what that shell looks like in all its different pieces. So it was a pretty complex advanced technology at this time. And that's kind of the story of Angel Island with the military here, is each generation, the technology was advancing very quickly and things became obsolete. And that's how you end up with people picnicking at a cannon site, because those cannons have gone out of style and fashion as things have advanced. All right, John, are you ready for us?
Yep.
All right, Erin, we can go back to John.
So the commands that we're gonna have to fire the cannon is gonna go something like this. Attention, gun crew. Spherical case, 3-second fuse, load. One person's gonna worm the bore. Gonna wet sponge. Dry sponge. Now we're gonna load the gunpowder. Use the rammer to get it all the way back. We're going to use the prick to expose the gunpowder. We're going to use a friction primer to set fire down the barrel.
Here's a close-up of a friction primer that has been used. So there's a tube and a pin. You pull the pin, that sends a small explosion into the black powder.
So now we have the lanyard onto the friction primer, and we have a loaded cannon ready to fire. Gun captain would say, prepare to fire, fire! Cease fire!
All right, thank you, John. Wow, that was loud. It is every time. I was wearing my ear protection too. We do have a few modern safety measures we do with the cannon. So we're wearing ear and eye protection to make sure that we do this safely. And again, no projectile, it's just a blank black powder being fired. All right, Erin, let's turn things back over to you now that we've ended with a bang.
All right, well, thank you for that big bang. That was amazing. John and Casey at Angel Island. And I'll bring Michael back here on screen. Thank you all for joining us today. If you have more questions, you can find us on the California State Parks website at parks.ca.gov and look up Fort Tejon State Historic Park or Angel Island State Park, and you can email us there and we'd be happy to get back to you. So thank you again for joining us. There's over 200 of you on the call today. It's wonderful to have you. Thanks to John and Casey at Angel Island. Thanks to Michael at Fort Tejon. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe, wear your masks, and we hope to see you when it's safe to do so. Take care, everyone.